This is the story of the 2018 SeaTac Horizon incident. This video will not be like my other videos. On this channel, I like to talk about what causes accidents in depth so that we can all learn from it. Usually that involves diving into why mechanical things or why people make mistakes. This video will be different and you will see why. On the 10th of August 2018, an airport worker at Seattle Tacoma International Airport was having a very bad day. He had been having issues in the past and today was his breaking point. At around 7 p.m., Richard Russell had gotten into a tug and he was racing across the airport towards a Dash 8 parked for maintenance. Once he got into the plane, he pulled out the chocks that secured the airplane and he went in. This was a two-man job, but he only had himself. In the cockpit, he furiously flipped switches, hoping that the engines would start. He wasn't trained for this, but he had a general idea of what to do from playing a lot of flight simulators. To his surprise, the engines roared to life, but he wasn't done yet. He hopped out of the plane and back into the tug and pushed the plane onto the taxiway. Then it was a mad dash for Russell to get back into the cockpit. Once he was in, he closed the cabin door. He was presented with an unfamiliar cockpit, but he knew the basics. He pushed the throttles forward and the Dash 8 started to move. He made his way through the maze of taxiways and aprons of Seattle's International Airport, and soon he was at runway 16 center. This was when ATC noticed that something was wrong. The controller saw the Dash 8 at the threshold and asked, "Aircraft on Charlie lining up runway 16 center, say your call sign?" No reply came from Russell. The controller had left professional courtesy behind. He was almost shouting at this point, "Who's the Dash 8 holding on runway 16 center?" The Dash 8 started rolling down the runway, its landing gear smoking as Russell had not disabled the brakes. But the Dash 8 took off and Russell was airborne. In the control tower, the controllers were in a frantic scramble trying to make sense of what was happening. A few of them were on the phone with the Oregon Air National Guard. 2 F-15s were scrambled and they had no idea about Russell's intentions. Both F-15s went supersonic over Seattle in a rush to get to Russell. What no one knew at that time was that tucked beneath the wings of the F-15s were Sidewinder and AMRAAM air-to-air missiles. Once in the air, Russell was still on the ramp frequency, and everyone was trying to figure out who was the one talking. Then Russell explained himself. He just wanted to fly around and check out Mount Rainier. The controllers, on the other hand, were trying their best to understand his competency over the aircraft so that they could get him to somehow land the plane. But Russell had no intentions of landing. But he did want to do a barrel roll in the Dash 8, and that is what he would do. In the control tower, the controllers found a Dash 8 pilot who was willing to talk Russell down. Russell at this point was down to 2,100 pounds of fuel, and it was going down quick. At about this time, he was coming up on mchord Airfield, an Air Force base near Seattle. He was too scared to put the plane down there because he thought that he'd be shot out of the sky. Now, the gravity of what he had done was starting to settle in for Russell. Russell just wanted to fly. He wanted to see how far he could push this plane, and he wanted to go out with a bang. All this time, the pilot on the ground was trying to get Russell to safely fly the plane with the autopilot. Russell jokingly asks, "Hey, you think if I land this successfully, Alaska would give me a job as a pilot?" To which the controller responds with, "I think they would give you a job doing anything if you can pull this off." With the F-15s in hot pursuit, Russell set his sights on the Olympic Mountains, a mountain range that he wanted to go see. But as he made his way over there, he started to look inward as to what he was really doing. He said, "I'm just a broken guy, got a few screws loose, I guess. Never really knew it until now." Now, he was finishing up flying by the Olympic Mountains. He now wanted to know if he could do a barrel roll in the Dash 8. He says, "I think I'm going to try and do a barrel roll." No one even knew if that could be done. He's not a trained pilot, and the Dash 8 is certainly not designed to do a barrel roll. Then he says the most heartbreaking thing ever. "And if that goes good, I'll just nose down and call it a night." End quote. Russell never intended on landing this plane. He takes the plane up to 5,000 feet and preps for his barrel roll. The Dash 8 noses up as the engines rev to max power, powering the plane into a sky for a maneuver that it was never designed for. Then a radio transmission comes in from one of the F-15s. "Target of interest just completed a barrel roll." The other pilot asked with a hint of disbelief in his voice, "Confirm he did a barrel roll?" Russell had done it with the slightest of margins. His plane was just 10 feet away from hitting the water. Russell could not believe that he had pulled it off. A part of him did not expect him to make it. But that was the end of the line for Russell. He was starting to run low on fuel, and he knew that he did not have much time left in the air. So before his plane died, he put his plane into a dive one last time. This time, he did not pull up. Captain Russell did not make it. Now, this is one hard video to make because unlike all the other videos that I've made, the reasons for this crash isn't technical or CRM based, it's human. Give me a technical report any day of the week and I'll tell you how and what went wrong. But this is something that I have no idea how to tackle. When I make these videos, I want to explain to you what exactly went wrong. I just don't want to give you a Wikipedia summary and call it a day, which is why I've got Casey, a good friend of mine, to talk about this. She's got a master's in psychology and she's an aviation nerd. She's the absolute perfect person to talk about this. If her name sounds familiar, that's because she runs the podcast called The Podcrashed with her friend Mariah. If you like my videos, you'll definitely like her podcast. Again, thanks Casey for coming on the channel. So, hey Casey, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited isn't maybe quite the right word, but this is a story that we've talked about and one that I've thought about a lot since it happened. And so I'm really glad to be talking about this with you.
Would you mind telling our viewers a little bit about yourself? Because I don't think not that many people are familiar
Yeah.
with your work. So, just educate away.
Yeah, so I'm a mental health counselor. I graduated a few years ago, so I get to work as a therapist. And my connection to aviation is that I worked in aviation at Buffalo Airport and JFK for a long time, and I was working at JFK in 2018 when this happened. And I'm the co-host of the Podcrashed, a podcast about plane crashes. So that's how you and I got to meet, through our shared passion for aviation stories.
So yeah, you're the absolute perfect person to talk about this because you have a connection to aviation. The aviation side of things, and you also know about the psychological, is that the right word, the psychological
Yeah.
aspects of it as well. So I feel like you're the absolute perfect fit to shed some light on what happened. And so you mentioned that you were working at JFK when this
Mhm.
happened. So when this happened, what was this a really big thing amongst the aviation community at JFK?
Yeah. So I remember the day that it happened, and I was at work the day that it happened at JFK. And I remember I remember on the first day, at least while I was at work, all anybody knew is, a ramp guy stole a plane. And some people, I think a lot of people had a lot of different reactions to kind of the initial news story. I think that there's something about it that's um, maybe thrilling. I'm just, to be totally honest, for people who work at the airport. There's something about being really close to these planes all day, being kind of spending every working day right in the middle of it, but not getting on the plane, definitely not flying the plane. I remember talking to a few people in my life who are not in aviation at all. And a question they asked was, how is that even possible? And I know that for a lot of people, I think it was scary to imagine that something like that's possible. But at the airport, the initial way it was told is just a ramp guy stole a plane, and kind of isn't that wild? And I don't think at that point, when I first heard about it, that people knew how it had ended, and people definitely hadn't heard the audio, didn't know what was going on, didn't know anything remotely close to the full story in the initial. But yeah, it was a big story. It was something that we all talked about.
Yeah, yeah. Apparently, what a lot of people are surprised by is the fact that airplanes don't really have keys. Like,
Right.
if you have access to a plane and if you have a ground power unit, you can definitely start up your plane and
Yeah.
just go away. And I'm like absolutely impressed that he was able to start it up
Yeah.
from, and there's like this footage of him just like pushing the plane back, running back in, starting the engines and just going away. And that takes
Mhm.
like, we'll get back to his, like, we'll get to his technical competency later. But if you could, and if you know,
Mhm.
how do you steal a plane? And to anyone watching, this is not a tutorial on how do you steal a plane. Please do not actually steal a plane. But
Please
if I
don't.
wanted to steal a plane, how would I go about doing it?
Yeah, I mean, you would get a job working on the ramp. That would do the trick. If you could get a job as a pilot, it's that much easier. But the ramp guys, again, I don't know if people are totally in touch with what it's like to work on the ramp, what the responsibilities are, and it's very hard. It's a lot of like menial work. I don't know if people realize that the ramp guys are the ones who like clean the plane in between flights and things like that. They are the ones who like obviously load all the bags, and you see all of that stuff. Wing walkers, like you see those different aspects of what they do. But um as he said, right, as anyone who's listened to the audio from the air traffic control recording knows, that he had some really marked, incredible competency that he built through playing the game that you play. I can't remember the name of it, Microsoft plane simulator or flight simulator. And but the you're on the ramp and the planes are on the ramp, so you can just take them. And don't do it, guys. Don't do it. Don't do it. But it's you're on the ramp and the plane is on the ramp. So if you want to take it, it's there. It's there. The reason it doesn't happen more is because thankfully people don't want to do it. But it's sitting there the same way that, like, if I have one of those electric scooters, there's no way to lock an electric scooter, right? If I leave it at the front of a store while I go shopping, you could just take it. It's just there, right there. So please don't. I need it. But yeah, the it's just there.
So before you start working at like an airport job, like a
Mm-hmm.
ramp or like check-in or whatever, what
Mm-hmm.
kind of scrutiny do you go through before you're admitted into the airport? Is it like more, are you scrutinized more than like a regular job, or is there like some kind of like really deep background check? What happens there?
Yeah, so you are fingerprinted. You have a full day of what's called like side a badge training before you get a badge that allows you to go into the employees only sections of the airport. That training is about the rules, that the responsibilities and the rules that you agreed to by getting the badge, but it also includes um, an explanation of your responsibilities as far as like keeping an eye out, right? Like the see something, say something kind of keeping an eye on bags that are left unattended, that kind of thing, but also keeping an eye, if you're on the ramp, out for people who are somewhere where it doesn't really make sense for them to be. Somebody who's in a vehicle just seem to be checking things out, that kind of stuff. So you're kind of like deputized in a way that's kind of strange. I always thought about that because in Terminal 1, where I worked at JFK, they would have a announcement that would go periodically, and it would say, like, if you see something suspicious, like, tell a Port Authority police officer or an airline employee. And it's always like, but I'm not, I don't work for the FBI. I have a minimum wage job checking people in. So that it's, but the scrutiny that you are personally under includes being fingerprinted, drug tested, and a background check. I don't know exactly where the line is for what kind of things could pop up in your background that would prevent you from getting a job. But I do know that I worked with people who were I worked with a lot of people who weren't U.S. citizens, so that's not a deal breaker. I worked with like is in some places. I think that could you could be unreasonably rejected from a job for that, but it was very common at the airport. I imagine that any felony would probably preclude you from working at the airport, and probably a lot of misdemeanors. I think that they it's hard enough to get hired, honestly, and then after that you have to get through um a background check that's performed by the Port Authority, but I assume is also goes through TSA, so the federal government and the local or airport local.
Yeah, that's what I was reading about, like Russell as well.
Mm-hmm.
With him, it's just like he had a really clean history, so to say. And then
Yeah.
it's just like out of nowhere, this person
Mm-hmm.
who is like beloved by many people, people categorized him as like a gentle soul. And then
Yeah.
out of the blue, he just does something like this. So what is,
Yeah.
as a therapist, what does that tell you?
A few different things come to mind. So one, when I think about this, right, what the conversation you and I are having, the and the people who might watch this, I think that there's going to be people who are just interested in it, people who are curious, but the groups of people that I think about the most are people who are suicidal, people who love someone else who's suicidal, or people who love someone who's committed suicide, because this was a suicide, right? That's what happened here. And I don't think that it's reasonable to frame it in a way other than that. Obviously, that's not to diminish the other elements of it, but the something that so my first job in mental health was at a crisis hotline. So I worked overnights at a crisis and suicide hotline. And during the training for that, the one of the first things that the training taught was that suicide is impulsive. When it actually happens, it's an impulsive act. And that really rubbed me the wrong way in the initial. Like when I first heard that, I was like, no, people are depressed for a long time. And then finally it kills them. They die of their depression. And the thing that I came to understand is that you there are millions and millions and millions of people who walk around all the time with a running thought about suicide in their mind, right? That who are deeply depressed, who think about it a lot, but the actual act, the moment that it happens, is very, very often, almost always impulsive. And that's part of the reason why very, very often, if people are interrupted and are not able to attempt to kill themselves, or if people are survive, they are much less likely to ever attempt again. And that goes into this. So it's a hard thing to absorb. It's very, very, very hard for me to believe. And I understand why people might have a negative reaction to that idea, but there is something about suicide, the actual act of going through with it, that tends to be impulsive. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But something you and I have talked about when you and I have just talked about this story and talked about Russell, we've talked about how Russell was a young man. He had been married for many years. I don't know. There's tons of stuff I don't know about him, of course, and I don't want to pretend to. But he had gone from owning a bakery with his wife, and It seems like that was something they really enjoyed, to moving back to Seattle in order to be closer to their families. And that's why he was working at the airport, was because his family was still in Alaska. So he got a job working that allowed him to use the Alaska Airlines flight benefits and visit his family. And there's lots of things where it's very, very easy to understand how he got to exactly where he got. But there's something about the crush of working in aviation. I'm just going to be very, very blunt. It's a really hard job. It's really relentless. The pay is very, very low. Or I'll just speak for particularly for Russell in the situation as he was in. The pay is very, very low. It's grunt work. It's menial work. and you can't let go of it because you love having flight benefits, right? And you love being around planes, and there's all these things that you like. And so I don't know what he went through that week or that month or that year, or I don't know what his inner world was like, but it's unfortunately not as unusual as we would like it to be, or it's not as unusual as we wish it was, maybe, for somebody to have like the impulsive desire to act. And the other thing that comes to mind that's particularly unique, I guess, to his experience was that as soon as he took the plane, even though he was still alive for another hour after that, flying in the air, talking to people, he was obviously very, very scared that his life was already over, that if he landed, that he was going to go to jail for the rest of his life, or that he would be like roughed up by the people who arrested him when he landed. And I think about people who live really good lives, right? People who have never been in any kind of serious trouble in their whole life. And for people who have never been in real trouble, for people who have never really, really, really messed up, if you really mess up, it feels like your life is over, because it's very, very hard to imagine how you'll survive it. It's hard to imagine if someone had told him it's not possible. No one could have told him this. No one on earth could have promised him what the outcome of an arrest would be for him. But if someone had told him, if you land it, you're going to get 5 years and you're going to be 34 when you get out, and like, deal. People who have never been in trouble have a hard time contextualizing that, because it just feels like your life is over. I've messed up too badly. There is no coming back from this. And that's a mindset and a thought process that can make it very, 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 very hard to land the plane, to come back from that.
Yeah, I completely agree, because in the recordings, you could hear the air traffic controller. He's like, oh yeah, there's McChord Air Force Base right there. You can just make
Mm-hmm.
a straight in approach. You can land this. And I do believe that he could have landed it
Yeah.
if he really wanted to, but he's like, oh
Mm-hmm.
no, they've got anti-aircraft like weapons over there. That's
Right.
like, if I land there, they're gonna rough. I think he said those exact same words. They're gonna rough me
Yeah.
up, or. And at some point,
Mm-hmm.
I remember him just like asking the controller, "Oh yeah, if I land this, do you think Alaska's gonna give me a job as a pilot?" So he
Mm-hmm.
kind of knew that landing was an option,
Mm-hmm.
but like you said, he just couldn't see a way out of it like that.
And it's really easy to, so he's not in his right mind, right? And I've seen his family talk in interviews about how hard it is to listen to that recording. And I will say, he was in the air for an hour, and the recording that we have access to is maybe 12, 13 minutes. So I don't know what else he said. I don't know what his family might have heard that we haven't, and that's totally fine. I'm just saying that because, yeah, of course I don't know everything. I don't know any more than the average viewer would know. I don't have access to anything beyond that. But um, there's something irrational about saying, I don't want to try to land because maybe they'll shoot me down or they'll rough me up. So I'm going to kill myself, right? And from the outside, you can see there's something irrational about worrying about getting roughed up or shot down when you're going to end your life. But that's not, I think that something that's important to also remember is, like, very early on in the recording that we do have access to, he talks about the fact that he's thrown up and he's very lightheaded. And I'm sure part of that is the altitude that he was flying at. But and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if he was at such a high altitude that that would explain all of it. And my assumption based on totally limited information is that he's in a heightened a radically heightened state. He is not fully in his right mind, even if he sounds like him, right? Which his family said, it sounds just like him. When you listen to it, he's so obviously charming. He's so obviously funny. He so obviously cares about other people. He's authentically concerned about if he's making the air traffic controller day worse, right? Like he authentically, he's still him, and he's not in his right mind. And I think that that's another thing that can be really hard when you love somebody who is suicidal or who commits suicide, because you're with them all the time and you can see that they're them and they're not in their right mind. And it's very, 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 very hard, but it is part of the picture. And if you're suicidal, depression, part of the lie of depression is that it has secret knowledge, right? That it's showing you something about the world that like normies or people who aren't depressed, people who are just like la la la, like living their life, that they don't see it the way you do. And like you have secret knowledge and people might like you, but that's just because they don't know that you're a piece of shit. And if that's the lie of depression, is that it's telling you the truth. And it's not. And when you're on the outside of it, when you're on the other side of it, you can see that it's not. You can see it for the lie that it is, but it is so loud and so tempting when you're in the midst of it to revel in that, in the enticing part of it, in the way that it isolates you and becomes like the only thing, the only source of anything that feels true or valuable in your life. It's poison. And I'm not saying this to call you crazy, because that's not what I think, but it is poisoning your mind. And that's really, really, you don't deserve that. You don't deserve it. It's not telling you the truth. But
Yeah, one of the things he does mention on the
mm-hmm.
recording is that when he just took off, he had like a cabin altitude alert going off, which meant that the cabin wasn't really pressurized, and
Mm-hmm.
they had a pilot in the tower trying to talk him down. And so
Right.
he was asking the pilot about how to pressurize the cabin because the
Right.
cabin altitude was really spiking. And that
Right.
may or may not have impaired his judgment to an
Right.
extent.
Right.
And there's also another thing that he says where it's like he says, oh yeah, it's like totally over for a guy like me, like, you know, it's like he says something along those lines where he uses
Mm-hmm.
the phrase guy like me for, you know, it's like, oh, it's like I don't really know how to say it, but he's like, oh, this is it for just a guy like me, I'm like a
Right.
nobody. And that's just like, and that's just it for him. And it was just like he was just in a very bad mindset like that at
Right.
that point.
Right.
Mhm.
And um there's something that I always feel like it's a hard thing to, like, person to person, human to human. I feel nervous talking about this because my goal is not to make anybody feel guilty, and quite the opposite, right? Quite really the opposite is true. And because of the impulsive nature, not of feeling suicidal, but of committing suicide, of like enacting it, because it's impulsive, the interrupting the attempt tends to be uh, unbelievably effective, I guess would be the way of saying it. Like if you had an enemy that you were like, you're a, I don't know, your father was killed by a mugger and you made it your life's work to hunt him down or something, right? If you had like an enemy like that, if something interrupted you, right? If that's all you were thinking about, you don't think that would stop you, right? But with suicide, because so it's so impulsive, like people who survive serious suicide attempts, people who survive, this is maybe graphic, I don't know if you want to include this, but people who survive like jumping off bridges, trying to commit the suicide, people who survive that pretty much always say that like change their mind, right? And that's horrible. And again, I have so much compassion for anybody who this like hits really close to home for, and I hope that you're taking care of yourself. But the and again, this is again maybe too graphic, but people who like shoot themselves and survive, they call 911, right? Because and that is bad. Guys, don't do that. And like don't do that. Don't hurt yourself, because as unbelievable and as hard to conceive of it's so difficult to conceive of, but it's very often, very frequently, very consistently true. And for the things that he talked about, that's public, right? So we don't know what else he might have talked about. We just don't, there's details that we don't know if they exist. We might have all of the recordings. He might not have been talking for the whole hour, or we might be missing huge chunks, which I would be fine with, to be clear. It's fine to not have access to all of that. But the things that he talks about are, he mentions like minimum wage, because he says maybe that'll grease the wheels with the higher ups. So even in this heightened state, even not totally in his right mind, even I think almost undoubtedly, if he could have snapped his finger and like undid all of it, I imagine he would have. But in that heightened state, he's talking about like, don't know, but I wonder, I think that there's a piece of that might have been, well, maybe Alaska Air. He worked for Horizon, which is like a contract company for doing the ramp work at SeaTac for Alaska. But he hopes that maybe this will lead to them getting better pay. Maybe they'll treat them better. Maybe and maybe they did. I don't know. Right. But he's thinking about how it affects other people in a lot of different ways. But he's also has that kind of unshakable belief that it's over for him. And I mean, the air traffic controller was talking to him, the FAA controller was talking to him, the pilots who talked to him, they are just people at work. This is not a normal part of their job. If you love somebody who is suicidal, or if you are suicidal, you are just a person who might feel really ill-equipped to deal with this, and you have to be gracious with yourself. And try to get some backup, right? Try to see if you can talk to somebody, even if they won't, see if they will. But yeah, it's a sad story, right? It's a sad story, no matter how you shake it.
Yeah, the FBI recently released like a lot of information. Like, I don't know,
Okay.
in April of 2022, they released like a large data dump on this case. And one of his aims was to like one of his stated motives was to, I don't even know if it was a motive, like something that he wanted to do was to do something that benefited all mankind. And now that you mentioned that his urge that would like it would improve things for otherwise, I feel like that really like ties into his how he wanted to like enact change for everyone else, but
Right.
except him.
And like I'm a woman, and I know most of the folks who watch your channel are men, and I don't want to pretend to I definitely don't want to ever talk down to men about their own mental health, and that's not my goal. So if you could trust me when I say that, because I do mean it, young men suffer horribly, right? And in so much isolation, and from things that I don't know if we really do a very good job of describing or articulating. And again, I don't know, right? I don't know. And I do not want to say something that if anyone who knew him personally, or his family, or his wife, I do not want to say anything that would ever make them feel guilty, because they have nothing to feel guilty about. but I think about the trajectory of going from, like, he was a youth group leader. I think he had his own business. He was like a newlywed. He was going to college. People talk about his blog, which was part of a school project, right? He had like interests, like he wanted to keep moving up in the world. And there is something that I think affects all of us, but I think young men and men in general suffer horribly when you feel like you are spinning your wheels, you're working really, really hard, your work is menial, your work is physically difficult, your work is you're not able to get ahead, if you feel like you're going backwards in life, if you feel like you're letting people down, if you feel like you're not achieving what you wanted to in life, and if you feel like you're not going to be able to, I think that is, I see how much men suffer from that, and in a way that I think is gendered, because I'll tell you, it doesn't actually feel good for women either, right? Just to be totally honest, but I can see the way that intersects with the way that men are told to evaluate themselves, to like observe their own value, and how exhausting and crushing that could be. And if you feel like, it's why, again, maybe you'll edit this out and that's okay, but it is part of the reason why young men are so susceptible to radicalization, right? Why are all soldiers, all terrorists, all like gang members, like these groups tend to be, it's people who can harness that like deep masculine desire to do something heroic and good and big, and this wonderful source of energy that has so much potential for good can be diverted in a way that hurts you personally, hurts people around you. And I don't doubt for a second that he did do an unbelievable amount of good in his life. And I don't doubt for a second that everyone who knew him and loved him and worked with him are grateful that he was in their life. Yeah. And it's sad that it's not fair, right? It's very, very, very hard. And it's very, very easy to have compassion for people who find themselves feeling that way.
So, let's say someone who is watching this, God forbid, is in a similar situation as Russell was.
Mm-hmm.
Where can they go for help? What can they do?
Yeah. So a lot of different things come to mind, because the easy and totally correct answer is to talk to somebody, right? Tell someone who you care about, tell someone who's close to you, tell someone who might be able to help you, tell like look for a therapist if that's something you have access to in your area. People tend to plug, and I as well they should, like the national suicide hotline or the different crisis hotlines that might exist in your country, and all of that is true, right? But I understand why that feels hollow to say and hollow to hear sometimes. And so I guess I'm going to say a couple different things, I guess. So I spent a long time, a big chunk of my life feeling that way. And it was kind of that, like a constant little thread, right? It just like runs through everything in your mind. There's kind of like, I could do the dishes or I could not be alive anymore, right? And that it just kind of constant. And something that does is it creates like thick, well-worn synaptic pathway in your brain. So your brain, it feels like to you, because it is what you're experiencing, that is just where your mind goes every single time. And there's something that can happen where thinking about not being alive anymore comes to be something like an escape fantasy, the way that other people might like fantasize about quitting their job or punching their boss or like abandoning their family or going on a vacation, a nice version, right? It can turn into that. And I'll be yeah, I'll talk about myself. I was on a bus in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, and I know this is such a very strange story, but I was by myself, and I there were all these like little tiny villages with like 100 people in them, and the bus would like stop so people could buy like snacks at those little villages. And I had the thought like I could just get off the bus here. Like if I'm gonna abandon everyone I know and like break their hearts, I don't have I can still be alive and do that, right? I can just get off here and just no one will find me, right? Eventually someone might find me, but it'll take a long, long, long time. And I know it sounds so weird, but again, you're not in your right mind, right? That's the thing. Even if you feel like you are, you're not. And the that's such a I know it's like a very weird thing, but it is a practical thing to basically pull your escape fantasy one step back, right? So if you're going to like break everyone's hearts and abandon everyone you know and give up on the life that you're living, you can actually do that and still be alive, right? And I'm not recommending it, but if you basically just can pull your escape fantasy back one step, you'd be surprised how much value that has. And again, I know we talked about it earlier, but the idea that there is life beyond some really big screw up, some really big serious trouble, that's really hard to believe. And it is in fact true. So, um, another thing you can do is, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, people who feel this way are not cut off from their compassion for other people. And I know that sounds strange, but sometimes if you are able to extend compassion or forgiveness or honesty or anything like that to other people and try to reconnect with your ability to offer that to yourself. Again, these are small things, but they're practical things that you can do. And yeah, like you should talk to a doctor. You should talk to a therapist if you can. You should call someone who can help you. You should just open your mouth and tell somebody how you're feeling. And they will not have magic words, but they will have some words, right? And there's, I guess, a piece of this that if you love somebody who feels that way and you are feeling the weight of that and the fear that comes along with that, you also need help, right? Like you also need a hand. You also deserve compassion and warmth and love and support. And the way that we can, all of us are capable of downplaying or degrading our own needs, deprioritizing ourselves when we're overwhelmed with taking care of someone else or prioritizing what they're going through. I'm definitely not advocating just looking out for yourself and like not caring how it affects other people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that deprioritizing yourself is not a necessary step. It does not have to be part of the picture. You are important. And I think that we talked about putting some like links to different things. I know it's a very international audience. I know that that's hard. I'm going to be honest too. If you spend a lot of time in online spaces that are super toxic, I know that there's something about that that can be really good and can feel really good. And I'm not shaming you and I'm not calling you a jerk or anything like that. But if you can expose yourself to a more positive online space. I know it sounds like such a funny thing to say, but if you can get out of the corner of the internet that is just sunk into the worst part of anything possible, why guys? You don't need that. Don't do that to yourself. You don't have to. There's nice parts of the internet. There's a million videos of nice things. I know it's like it sounds funny, but even that, if you don't have somebody in your life, if you can't afford therapy, if you can't do that, trade out a toxic space that you're in if you can for a more supportive space. Even if it's a space where you're just able to type out how you're feeling and not get, called an idiot or whatever.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was actually really profound. And
Mm.
well, it must have been hard for you to share that, especially with such a large audience. And thank you for sharing that. And at the end of the day, I hope that this helps someone. It's like if another Russell is in the making right now, and not even
Mm.
Russell, like if anyone, whoever's like struggling with whatever. And I hope that, your words, which is told, helps them in like some small way, because that's what this video is all about. Because usually,
Mm.
I mean, give me a malfunction or like a CRM
Mm.
failure or like pilot screwing up. I know how to like handle that and like turn that into a story, but this is just like something so outside of my wheelhouse. It's like something
Mm.
that I have no idea how to approach in any way, shape, or form. And you put it absolutely beautifully. You um like caught every single aspect of it that I wanted to come across. And you did it beautifully.
Mm.
It was absolutely moving, for the lack of a better word. And thank you for joining me on this.
Yeah, I really appreciate. I was so thrilled when you like we're buddies, guys. That's the thing. We're friends. But I was so excited when you reached out to me about this particularly because it is something that it's something I think about a lot. I'm just gonna be honest. This is one of those stories that is stuck in my head, right? It's one of the ones that and it is like a hard thing to figure out how to talk about in the context of aviation, right? And like the normal aspects of aviation. But I'm glad that I am so grateful that you want to use your platform this way. And I am grateful to, yeah, all you guys who are still hanging out. So if you if you like plane crash content and uh if you like if you can tolerate this vibe, pretty much this vibe, then you might like the Podcrashed, which is our podcast. Mine and Mariah's podcast. It should be everywhere, the Podcrashed. And Aaron is in a, what do you call yourself? What do you call yourself to your listeners?
I don't really like put. I
You
think
don't
I've
put any
like.
name?
I don't know, honestly. I think I've put my name out there, but it's
Okay.
fine. I think
I
it's
can say
out there.
you. I'll just do that. Like, yeah. So like you've been in an episode and that was really great. And I will say this. I don't know if this is a useful thing to say, but like my email address is out there, right? Because of the Podcrashed. And I love hearing from people. And you will hear me say that like a million times if you do listen to our episodes, because we actually do love hearing from you so much. I'm gonna say this. I know that when folks do like talk about this kind of topic, that it means that some people are going to send me an email talking about what's going on in your life. And you can do that. I'm not telling you not to do that, not even by a long shot, but you deserve somebody who is your person to talk to. And I just want to say that you can message me and I lovingly receive it, seriously, but don't, that's not a replacement for, that should be in addition to getting somebody who can be there for you in your life all the time, whether that's a friend or a community or your own therapist or group therapy. Group therapy is rough, but it is powerful. So watch out. But yeah. So we end every episode of the podcast by reminding all of you that we love you. And I hope that tomorrow is better than today, whatever that means for you. Wow. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that's a nice note to end on. I'll catch you guys next time then.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, that's it. I really hope that you like this different style of video from the usual style that I usually do. If you did enjoy it, do let me know down in the comments below. It will really help me understand what kind of videos you guys like to see. If you or anyone that you know is struggling with mental health issues right now, I will put up some links on the screen that will hopefully help you. You can also find them down in the description. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I will catch you guys next time. Stay safe.